that or not? And we're done. Alright, we're done with this one. So why did, oh, this is the entire menu. The entire manual. This is the menu for the manual. Open world tools, physics simulation, audio and sound. Well, this is, we'll get back to this. This is too complicated at this point. Lightmass global illumination. Okay, this is what we're interested in as a person who enjoys sunlight. Lightmass creates light maps with complex light interactions like area shadowing and diffuse interreflection. Holy crap. It is used to pre-compute portions of the lighting contribution of lights with stationary and static mobility. Communication between the editor and Lightmass is handled by the Swarm agent, which manages the lighting build locally and can also distribute the lighting build to remote machines. The Swarm agent, which runs minimized by default, also tracks lighting build progress and keeps you up to date which machines are working for you, what they are working on, and how many threads each one is using. So you might be wondering, like, why is this important? Why is it important to distribute the work across multiple machines? Is if you have a giant level with thousands of lights, this stuff gets really complicated. And so it takes up a lot of computer time to calculate these light maps. So that's why you need render farms, right? So some, like, if you're making a big AAA game, you would have just computers computing light maps for days and days because you have render farms for cutscenes, and you have like this sort of stuff where you just have dozens of computers calculating lighting for you while you're working on other things. So this is not important when you only have like 2 lights in the scene, which is like this, here, right? It only has 2 lights in the entire scene, and so it's not that complicated. Whereas if you have, as I said, hundreds or even thousands of lights in the scene, then it's going to take a lot longer than this. Like, even this is taking a while. Like building lighting here, even this is taking a while, right? You can see how long this takes, and there's only 2 lights, and it's a tiny, tiny scene. It took okay, that's the match. Never mind. Wow, this is. I want to play this. Let me just keep reading first. All right. Features for static and stationary lights. Diffuse interreflection. Oh, look at this. Look how architectural this is. Diffuse interreflection is by far the most visually important global illumination lighting effect. Light bounces by default with Lightmass, and the base color term of your material controls how much light and what color bounces in all directions. This effect is sometimes called color bleeding. Diffuse interreflection is incoming light reflecting equally in all directions, which means that it is not affected by the viewing direction or position. Here is a scene built by Lightmass with a single directional light and only direct lighting shown. The areas that are not directly visible to the light are black. This is the result without global illumination. Okay, so they're telling you. So with only one directional light, if the light doesn't bounce, then the light hits these areas and this is the only stuff you see. But using global illumination, or calculating global illumination, you have the light bouncing off the floor and then onto the surrounding walls and onto other surrounding geometry. So you can see this stuff, even though there's no direct lighting onto it, there's diffuse lighting. This is what the first diffuse global illumination bounce looked like. Notice the shadow behind the chair on the left. This is called an indirect shadow because it is the shadow of the indirect light. The brightness and color of the diffuse bounces depends on the incoming light and the diffuse term of the material that the light interacts with. Each bounce is darker than the previous, since some of the light gets absorbed by the surfaces instead of being reflected. So the tutorial is giving you an introduction to lighting. The pillar bases get more indirect light than other surfaces because they are closer to the areas in direct light. So this is the indirect light minus the direct light, but because there's more light here, therefore this is brighter. And also this is brighter too, because although you can't see it, well, I guess you can see it. So because the direct light is hitting that surface and then bouncing up to there, Therefore, this part is also brighter than, for example, this stuff back here. So this is the first bounce, this is the second bounce, this is the second diffuse bounce. The light has become much more attenuated and evenly distributed. Yes, alright. And here is the scene with 4 diffuse bounces combined. Simulating global illumination creates much more detailed and realistic lighting than manually placing fill lights. Indirect shadows in particular are not possible with fill lights. Alright, so this is 4 diffuse bounces plus direct lighting. Looks good to me. This stuff used to be so hard. Back when I was, I don't know how old you are, back when I was young, this stuff was so hard to do in 3D modeling programs. Like you had to go through so much calculation. So I mean, it's still a lot of calculation, but it's just that it's all been streamlined. The user interface has been streamlined, is what I mean. So you just put in one button for atmosphere and then one button for the sun, and then you like click one button to build all the lights and it does it for you. Whereas I remember back when I was in university, first trying to figure this stuff out, like there was a whole separate interface to do the indirect lighting. Because even like back then, it wasn't built into the main program. It was like there was the modeling program, and then there was a lighting plugin in the program, and so it's like a separate thing because it wasn't integrated. So it had the same functionality. It's just the UI was really complicated because it was a plugin. It wasn't even part of the main program. Anyway, now here in Unreal Engine, the workflow is just a lot smoother, right? So good, like it. Bounce lighting picks up the diffuse color of the underlying material. So you see how the columns are red because the lighting bounces off the red cloth, like that there. As you can see below, this is where the term color bleeding comes from. Color bleeding is most noticeable with highly saturated colors. You can exaggerate the effect by raising diffuse boost on the primitive material or level. Alright, you can increase the effect. Nice, look at that. Character lighting. Lightmass places samples in a uniform 3D grid inside the Lightmass importance volume. That's what it means, okay. So the Lightmass is the diffuse lighting engine, and the Lightmass importance volume tells the computer which areas to calculate for Lightmass. Right, that's what it means. At low resolution, and also on top of upward-facing surfaces that characters are likely to walk on at a higher resolution. Each lighting sample captures indirect lighting from all directions, but not direct lighting, right? The first image is a debug visualization of lighting samples placed above the floor. The second image is the same scene in lit mode. Notice how the samples above the red tapestry picked up the red bounce light, right? The samples are visualized as a single color, but they really capture lighting from all directions. So in a uniform grid throughout the space, it calculates how much light and what color the light is at that point in the space. And that's used for character lighting, so that if because this stuff, everything is static, right? But then if anything is moving through the space, it'll use this lighting information to light the character that's moving through the space. I see. This is so interesting. The indirect lighting cache then interpolates the indirect lighting for a movable object using these lighting samples. Right. So remember like those boxes that we could push around because they had physics on them. So those things wouldn't have the big textures, so they wouldn't have this stuff. But they would be lit using this, so that if you put throw a box onto the red cloth, it would also become red because of this data, right? The indirect lighting affects the color of the light environment shadow, but not the direction. Use show visualize volume lighting samples to preview these in your viewport. Right. For more information, see the indirect lighting cache documentation. Interesting. Limitations. The default settings for volume sample placement will result in a large number of samples in a large map. This will cause indirect lighting cache interpolation times to be very large. Use static lighting level scale to reduce the sample count in large maps. Static lighting level scale. But that would reduce the quality, wouldn't it? Movable objects outside the lightmass importance volume will have black indirect lighting. Okay, I see. So, so anything outside the lightmass importance volume just wouldn't have indirect lighting on it. Okay, I see what that means. I mean, that's not too bad. Ambient occlusion. No ambient occlusion. Wait. No, but if you already have this, why would you need ambient occlusion as well? I thought ambient occlusion is supposed to simulate. Yeah, it is. No, ambient occlusion is supposed to simulate indirect lighting. But if you have indirect lighting, you don't need ambient occlusion, I thought. That's weird. No, this is... what? Lightmass calculates detailed indirect shadows automatically, but it can be useful to exaggerate indirect shadows for artistic purposes or to enhance the perception of proximity in the scene. Yeah, no, that's what I said. So, this is to exaggerate indirect shadows. It's not realistic, it's exaggerated. Ambient occlusion is the indirect shadowing you would get from a uniformly bright upper atmosphere, like an overcast sky. Lightmass supports calculating ambient occlusion, applying it to direct and indirect illumination, and then baking it into light maps. Sure. Ambient occlusion is enabled by default and can be disabled by unchecking the checkbox Use Ambient Occlusion in the Lightmass settings of the Lightmass under the World settings. In the first image is a scene with indirect lighting but no ambient occlusion. In the second image is the same scene with ambient occlusion applied for both the direct and indirect lighting. Note the darkening where objects come together. Yeah, but this is exaggerated. This is actually what it should be. Okay. I mean, this is kind of weird though. This is where it gets weird because, you know, in the real world you can't just change these numbers. So you can make things look really weird because it's like it's kind of correct, but it's a little off or it's a little exaggerated if you fiddle with these numbers too much. So like this sort of light, this one, especially this one, is really weird. Anyway, you can do stuff like this, I guess. I'll keep that in mind. Visualize ambient occlusion. Overrides light maps with just the occlusion factor when lighting is built. This is useful for seeing exactly what the occlusion factor is and comparing the effects of different settings. Max occlusion distance. Maximum distance for an object to cause occlusion on another object. No, but ambient occlusion is like an approximation of indirect lighting. Why would you use both? If you have one, why would you use the other? I don't know. Fully occluded samples fraction. Fraction of samples taken that must be occluded in order to reach full occlusion. Math. Note that there's also a per primitive fully occluded samples fraction, which allows controlling how much occlusion an object causes on other objects. I'm just thinking how weird this can become if you like adjust the numbers for each individual objects for how much they occlude. So like you have like one small object with a high occlusion and a big object with small occlusion, and then it's like, that's so weird. That would be so weird. Anyway, ambient occlusion is nearly free as far as lighting build time goes, when number direct lighting bounces is greater than 0. Alright, well, that's not nearly free. What they mean is that compared to the lighting bounces, the amount of processing time ambient occlusion takes is negligible. It's not nearly free. It's very small in comparison to the lighting bounces or indirect lighting bounces. It's not actually free. Like ambient occlusion is not actually free. It's just a lot cheaper than indirect lighting bounces. Is what they mean to say. Like nearly free is quote nearly free. It's not really nearly free. Anyway. Limitations. Ambient occlusion requires a fairly high light map resolution to look good, since it changes quickly in corners. Preview quality builds do not do a very good job at previewing ambient occlusion, since AO requires pretty dense lighting samples, just like indirect shadows. Alright. Masked shadows. Lightmass takes the opacity mask of blend masked materials into account when calculating shadows. The part of the material that gets clipped in the editor viewports also does not cause any shadowing, which allows much more detailed shadowing from trees and foliage. Right. So here you can see that the leaf is in fact just a square geometry there. But it's got transparency, right? So the transparency of the leaf shape is in the texture, not in the geometry. But Lightmass takes the texture transparency into account, and so the shadow down here you'll see is leaf shaped. So there's leaf shaped shadows down here, even though this is a square if you look at the geometry only, because Lightmass takes into account the transparency. Alright, that's good. Features for stationary lights only. Bent normal sky occlusion. Bent normal. Lightmass generates directional occlusion in the form of bent normal whenever a skylight with stationary mobility is enabled. I don't even know what that means. I don't even know what that means. Distance field shadow maps. Lightmass computes distance field shadow maps for stationary lights. Distant field shadow maps maintain their curvy shape very well even under lower resolutions. However, they did not support area shadowing or translucent shadows. Why don't they support translucent shadows? Okay. Features for static lights only. Area lights and shadows. With Lightmass, all lights with static mobility are area lights by default. The shape used by point and spotlight sources is a sphere, whose radius is set by the light source radius under Lightmass settings. Directional light sources use a disk positioned at the edge of the scene. Light source size is one of the two factors controlling shadow softness, as larger light sources will create softer shadows, right? The other factor is distance from the receiving location to the shadow caster. Area shadows get softer as this distance increases, just like in real life. Distance from the receiving location to the shadow caster. Okay, so the further away it is, and the bigger the source. So the bigger the source, and the further away it is, the softer the shadows. As you can see down here. So this is softer than this. All right, that's just simple. It's simple in that it mimics reality, so it's intuitive, is what I mean. In the first image, a static directional light with only static lighting, the penumbra size is the same everywhere. In the second image, Lightmass calculated area shadows, whose sharpness is controlled by both the light source size and occluded distance. Notice how the shadow of the pillar is much sharper close to where the pillar meets the ground. Right. Good. Okay, cool. Cool story. Oh look, columns and lights. The light source radius for point and spotlights is drawn in yellow wireframe, while the influence radius is drawn in teal. In most cases, you want to make sure the light source does not intersect any shadow casting geometry, or the light will be emitting on both sides of that geometry. Right. Okay. So, alright. Yeah, okay. So you don't want this circle to intersect geometry, because otherwise it'll seem like the light is, on the outside of the thing. Translucent shadows. Light passing through a translucent material that is applied to a static shadow casting mesh will lose some energy, resulting in a translucent shadow. That's cool. Is that just automatic? This boggles my mind, because I can remember how difficult this stuff used to be. Like, none of this was automated, especially translucent shadows. Like, you have to like create a texture for the window, like the stained glass window, for example. You have to create a texture for the stained glass, and then you have to create another texture, which is the map of the translucent shadow. So it was not automated. You have to kind of do that manually. Anyway, I'm just happy that it's automated now. Thanks Epic Games. Light passing through a translucent material that's applied to a static window. Alright, we just read that. The amount of light passing through the material is called transmission and ranges between 0 and 1 for each color channel. A value of 0 would be fully opaque, and a value of 1 would mean that the incident light passes through unaffected. There's no material input for transmission, so currently it is derived from the other material inputs as follows. Lit materials, blend translucent and blend additive transmission, LERP, white base color opacity, modulate, sure. I mean, sure. Oh, look at that, that's cool, look at that. This means that at an opacity of 0, the material will not filter out incident lighting and there will be no translucent shadow. At an opacity of 1, incident lighting will be filtered by the material's emissive or base color, depending on whether it's lit. Note that indirect lighting will sometimes wash out the translucent shadows and make them less saturated than the emissive or diffuse of the translucent material. Right. I mean, it's still a little bit complicated. But not very much. There are several factors controlling translucent shadow sharpness. In the first image, a large light source was used, directional light with a large source angle of 5. And in the second, a small light source was used, light source angle of 0. Sure. In the first image, a small light source was used, but the light map resolution was too low to capture the sharp translucent shadows. In the second image, the material was exported at too low of a resolution, controlled by the export resolution scale in the material editor, to capture sharp shadows. Okay. This seems complicated. Indirect light is also affected by translucent materials. That's amazing. Look at that. The red color from there is bouncing onto the walls. Translucent shadows into indirect lighting. That's amazing. I'm so glad this stuff is automated. I'm telling you. I'm so glad this stuff is automated. The window in this image filters incoming light based on its transmission, and that light then bounces around the scene but is color modified. Amazing. Limitations. Translucent materials currently do not scatter light. Oh, so they will not bleed color onto objects around them. I mean, what it means is that, so this red stuff, you see the red stuff here is not it's not back here. So the red color only appears after bouncing onto this. And whereas there's no red around here, which in real life you might expect, because of scattering, of the light kind of scattering through the glass around here. So this is a little bit strange. Now that it's been pointed out to me, it's a little bit strange. The first diffuse bounce is currently not affected by translucent shadows. This means that first bounce indirect light passing through a translucent material will not be filtered by the light, by the material's transmission. Okay, so this is like second bounce only. Refraction caustics from transmissions is currently not supported. Oh no! Caustics! No caustics. Well, caustics is quite difficult. I mean, I kind of understand because of what. So the best example would be a prism. What it means is that if you make a prism in this lighting engine, you won't get a rainbow. But that's a lot to ask for, right? It's a lot to ask for. If you make a triangular block of translucent material and then shine a light through it, and then to have that create a rainbow on the other side, that would be reality, but that would be a very difficult thing to ask a lighting engine to do. But I would be impressed. I would be very impressed if the day comes that we can make prisms and rainbows. Well, we can look forward to that in the coming years and decades, I suppose. But it also means stuff like rainbows won't happen. So if you have like rain effects and then the light going through the rain effects, you won't get automatic rainbows. And I guess the caustics, usually the example is a swimming pool. Imagine if you have like a swimming pool and it's dark, but there's a one light source, and then there's a swimming pool, and then the rippling water would reflect the light onto the ceiling in rippling patterns. And so that's the caustics. That's the classic caustic, and that's not supported, which is a shame. But you can fake that stuff if you want. Getting the best quality with Lightmass. Man, look at these environments. Making lighting noticeable. Well, just increase the contrast. that's easy. Making lighting noticeable. Diffuse textures. During rendering, lit pixel color is determined as base color times lighting, so base color directly affects how visible the lighting will be. High contrast or dark diffuse textures make lighting difficult to notice, while low contrast mid-range diffuse textures let the lighting details show through. Okay. Compare the lighting clarity between the scene in the first image built with mid-range diffuse textures to the second scene in this. To the scene in the second image, also built with Lightmass but with noisy, dark, diffuse textures. Only the most high-frequency changes are noticeable in the scene in the second image, like the shadow transitions. Alright, because all the surfaces on the inside are dark, not much of the light is being bounced around, is what it's trying to say. Whereas because here, like the stone is a very light beige color, therefore the light is more able to bounce around inside the space because it's a lighter color, is what they're talking about. I mean, sure. Alright. And then here, the unlit mode shows you how, like, look how white these textures are, right? Compared to how dark these textures are. That's what they're talking about. The unlit view mode is useful for viewing the diffuse term. The scene in the first image looks flatter and more monotone in the unlit view mode, which means the lighting is doing all the work, and variations in the final pixel color are mostly due to lighting differences. To get good lighting, your scene should look flat and boring in the unlit view mode. I don't entirely agree with that. I mean, you'll get more lighting. I'm not sure you'll necessarily get good lighting. It's a distinction that I think needs to be made, is that you'll get more lighting effects. But whether it's good lighting effects, like if you just mix, white boxes and expect to have good lighting, I don't know if that's accurate. Inaccurate understanding. Baking lighting and macro features into the diffuse textures will counteract the lighting. Baking lighting and macro features in the diffuse textures will counteract the lighting. All right. Well, you don't. What they mean is you should let Lightmass do the baking. You don't bake your own cookies. Let Lightmass bake your cookies for you. Using the editor's color picker on several parts of the unlit engine, we can see that the scene in the first image has diffuse values around 0.5. Sure. While the scene in the second image has diffuse values around 0.08. Looking at the histogram of these unlit images in Photoshop gives a good idea of the distribution of the diffuse textures, right? So you can see basically it's the first image is lighter and the second image is darker. I don't know why they have to give you Photoshop graphs to just say this is lighter, this is darker, alright? In case you don't get it. Alright, but you can analyze it in Photoshop if you want to. Lighting setup. Avoid ambient lighting. Ambient lighting, like ambient cube map, adds a constant ambient term to your level, which reduces contrast in directly lit areas. All right. Okay. This again, it's if you're not familiar with what they're talking about, it's also confusing because ambient lighting can mean a lot of things. What they mean is a ambient lighting found in 3D modeling software, which is just adding a certain brightness to all surfaces. That's what they mean by ambient lighting. But in lighting science, that's not what it means. This is only in computer graphics. This is what it means. So when they say avoid ambient lighting, what they mean is avoid artificial ambient lighting is what they mean, or like avoid fixed ambient lighting is what I don't. Anyway. phrases and terms. Set up lights so that there's a high contrast between the directly lit areas and the indirectly lit areas. The contrast will make it easier to pick out where the shadow transitions are and will give your level a better sense of depth. Right. But only if you want the contrast. I mean, you don't always want contrast. I mean, sure, contrast looks good. I'm not saying contrast is bad, it often looks good. But sometimes you don't want it. For example, like if you're presenting a desert scene and you want to emphasize the oppressiveness of the midday sun in the desert, then you don't need the contrast. You know what I mean? So it depends on what you're trying to communicate, right? So you only want contrast if you actually mean to communicate contrast. So this sort of advice is like, you know, it depends on the circumstances. Set up lights so that the bright areas are not too bright and dark areas are not completely black, but still have detail noticeable. It's important to check out dark areas on the final target display. Yes. Always check the dark areas to make sure it's not completely pitch black, because black screen the game is not a fun game. Improve lighting quality, light map resolution. Using texture light maps with high resolution is the best way to get detailed quality lighting. Using high light map resolution has the downside of taking up more texture memory and increasing build time, so it's a trade-off. Ideally, most of the light map resolution in your scene should be allocated around the high visual impact areas and in places where there are high frequency shadows. Okay, I mean that's pretty tricky. That's pretty tricky, but okay. So you focus the light map resolution in the places where you want to look good. Light map solver quality. Light map solver settings are automatically set based on what quality of build is requested in the lighting build options dialog. Production should give good enough quality that the artifacts are not clearly noticeable with a diffuse texture applied. Right? Getting the best lighting build times. There are several ways to improve your light mass build times. Fewer lights. Fewer lights is the big thing. Only have high resolution light maps in areas that have high frequency, quickly changing lighting. Reduce the light map resolution for brush surfaces and static meshes that are not in direct lighting or affected by sharp indirect shadows. This will give you high resolution shadows in areas that are most noticeable. I mean, that's tricky though, because you have to manually adjust the light map resolution for each individual object. So you have to make sure that the time you save in the build time is offsetting the amount you spend manually adjusting the light map resolution for each individual object. Like if you have like a million objects in a scene and you're adjusting the light map resolution for each individual object, you might end up spending more time doing that than it takes to just render the whole thing. Surfaces that are never visible to the player should be set to the lowest possible light map resolution. Again, yes, but if it's not seen by the player, but it's important in reflecting indirect light into a part that is seen by the player, maybe you don't do that. Maybe you want to keep that resolution high. It's very. I'm being very picky here, right? I'm being extremely picky here, but imagine if it's the back of a box that you can't see, but there's a thing on that surface that reflects light onto another surface that you can see. Then you wanna keep that high resolution to make this look good. But even if you can't see this anyway, I'm being picky. I'm being real picky. Use a light mass importance volume to contain the areas that are most important just around the playable area. Optimize the light map resolutions across the map so that build time for meshes is more even. The lighting build can never be faster than the slowest single object, regardless of how many machines are doing the distributed load. Oh, wait. Oh, avoid large continuous meshes that surround a large part of the level and with high light map resolution. You get better build times if you break these up into more modular pieces, especially on machines with many cores. Oh, okay, that's important. Because when the job is split between different machines or even different threads on the same machine, it breaks it up into the separate objects. So it calculates each object separately. So if you have like a giant complicated shape, it can't break that up into multiple pieces for you. And so that's going to take a long time. So if you break that giant piece into, like if you have a huge terrain, for example, instead of having one giant complex mesh, like have it cut up into different pieces, then it will render faster. I see. Okay, that's important. That's important to know. Well, it's probably not important for me because I'm not going to make anything big and complex. The lighting build info dialog is a very important tool for improving lighting build times. First, build lighting in the level that you want to see stats for, then open the dialog builder, build lighting info, lighting static mesh info. Change the drop down to lighting build info. This will show a sorted list of meshes and how long they took to compute lighting for. Alright, I see. Oh man, look at all this stuff. Wow, wow, hey, look how complicated that is. Lightmass settings, lightmass importance volume. Many maps have meshes out to the edge of the grid in the editor, but the actual playable area that needs high quality lighting is much smaller. Lightmass emits photons based on the size of the level, so those background meshes will greatly increase the number of photons that need to be emitted, and lighting build times will increase. The lightmass importance volume controls the area that lightmass emits photons in, allowing you to concentrate it only on the area that needs detailed indirect lighting. Areas outside the importance volume only get one bounce of indirect lighting at a lower quality. So I mean, they say to put that around the playable area, but if there's stuff outside the playable area that you want to look good, you want to include that stuff as well. So you want to like include anything that the player sees, which you wanted to see at high resolution. An overhead wireframe view of a multiplayer map is shown in the first image. The actual playable area that needs high quality lighting is the small green blob at the center, this part here. So all this is just background. This is the stuff that needs high quality lighting. In the second image, a close-up of the playable area of the multiplayer map is shown with the correctly set up lightmass importance volume selected, which is that. Okay, alright. The lightmass importance volume reduces the radius of the region to light from 80,000 units to 10,000 units, which is 64 times less area to light. Sure. You can add a lightmass importance volume to a level by dragging a lightmass importance volume object from the Volumes tab of the Modes menu into the level and then scaling it to the needed size. You can also convert a brush into a lightmass importance volume by clicking the Convert Actor drop-down box inside the details under Actor. Wait a minute. If any brush can be a lightmass importance volume, doesn't it mean that it can be a weird shape? Doesn't that mean it can be like a sphere? Or even just like a blob? After clicking the drop-down box, a menu will appear where you can select the type of actor to replace the brush with. Alright, cool. If you place multiple lightmass importance volumes, most of the lighting work will be done with the bounding box that contains all of them. However, volume lighting samples are only placed inside smaller volumes. Okay. I'm not sure. Okay. World settings. Lightmass settings can be adjusted inside the world settings window under the lightmass section. You can access world settings by clicking the settings icon from the main toolbar. We haven't done that before. Whoa. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on here. Engine scalability. Resolution scale. Near, medium, far, epic, cinematic. Anti-aliasing quality. I'm not sure if I should. What if I set it to low? Medium. Low. Cinematic. Epic. Auto? Auto is low. Alright. So, the Unreal Engine has judged my computer and concluded that it's crap. I went to auto quality and it says your computer sucks, Simon. Simon, your computer is terrible. We're gonna set it to as low as possible. Alright, Unreal Engine. Alright, thanks. Thanks for telling me. Let me just rebuild the lighting again. Oh man, Unreal Engine has told me my computer is crap. Force no pre-computed lighting. This essentially deactivates Lightmass' ability to produce light and shadow maps, forcing the level to only use dynamic lighting. Static lighting level scale. Scale of the level relative to the scale of the engine, which is 1... Okay, this is important to know. 1 Unreal unit equals 1 centimeter. 1 Unreal unit equals 1 centimeter. That's important to know. This is used to decide how much detail to calculate in the lighting, and smaller scales will greatly increase build times. For a huge level, larger scales around 2 or 4 can be used to lower build times. Right. Number of indirect lighting bounces. Number of times light is allowed to bounce off surfaces starting from the light source. 0 is indirect lighting only. 1 is 1 bounce, etc. Bounce 1 takes the most time to calculate, followed by bounce 2. Successive bounces are nearly free, but also do not add very much light, as light attenuates at each bounce. Right. It's darker than before. I wonder what happened. Maybe I don't want it to be 0.5? Did changing the quality adjust the did changing the quality of the graphics also change the lighting? Indirect lighting quality, global illumination solver, lighting smoothness, environment color. Well, I don't think we need to read all that. We're just gonna keep it on default, I think. Level lighting quality, lighting settings, primitive component settings. Indirect lighting saturation, shadow exponent. 0 will result in indirect lighting being completely desaturated. 1 will be unchanged. It's counting how much color, I think. How much color is in the indirect lighting. Controls the fall off of shadow penumbras, or how fast areas change from fully lit to fully shadowed, right? Light source angle. Lightmass settings can be adjusted on a brush added from the Geometry tab of the Mode menu. Details. Two-sided lighting. Shadow indirect only. If checked, this object will be lit as if it receives light from both sides of its polygon. So basically, if you have an interior, so if you're inside the box and you want to see the inside of the box, you have to use two-sided lighting. Shadow indirect only. If checked, this object will only shadow indirect lighting. This is useful for grass, since the geometry that is rendered is just a representation of the actual geometry, and does not necessarily cast accurately shaped shadows. It's also useful for grass because the resulting shadows would be too high frequency to be stored in pre-computed light maps. Right. Shadow indirect only. Right. Base material settings. Cast shadow as masked for translucent shadows. Treats the materials as if it's masked for the purposes of shadow casting. Alright, that's important. So if you have translucent materials, basically. Diffuse boost scales the diffuse contribution of this material to static lighting. Export resolution scale. Alright, well, this is very interesting. This is very interesting. I don't know if it's interesting for you guys, but interesting stuff to know. So, man, lighting quick start guide. But we've read the detailed stuff already. Alright, I just wanna... I've been recording for 2.5 hours. Alright, before we finished, let me just launch this. Save level as roomless save. All right, let me launch this, and we can play this level for a little while. Processing assets for Windows. Yeah, and then I'm gonna take a break. I think I'll cut this stuff up into maybe like. Wait, what? Unable to be loaded? Oh, I need to build it after I save it or something. I think we're gonna could not be found. That's not cool. Hold on. Let me close that. Let me just build this and then launch this again. I hadn't saved this level. I think it was the problem. I hadn't saved it before I built it, so that didn't work. Also, the sound. In the level, there was sound. There was wind. Why was this? Save selected. Roomless build data. Wait, what? Suppose what? Why is it failing to? I don't understand. No, wait a minute. No, where's my thing? Launch cancel. Where's my build lighting only? Build quality use good. Save current. I don't. Why can't it? Why isn't it building? Level, roomless, persistent. I don't understand why it's not launching. I don't know what's going on. Save all levels. Launch. Yeah, no, why? No, why is it not? Content. Roomless is this. Roomless build data. Lighting, light level quality, quality production. What's the problem? I mean, I don't even know where the other room is. Oh, there's like there's another level, isn't it? File open level. Content, starter content. But there's a default level too, which I don't know. So this is this. Wait, and now it's tutorial, and now it's fine? Also, why is it? Oh, it's high dynamic range. All right. So if you're wondering why we can see so clearly at nighttime, it's because of high dynamic range lighting. Cool. I don't know if it's really cool, but it's okay. So when you stare at the light, your eye adjusts to the brightness, and then when you don't stare at the light, your eye adjusts to the. Let me just sit in the chair here and play with the high dynamic range lighting shenanigans. Super interesting. Let me just get behind here. So now everything's a lot brighter because we're not staring at the light. All right. Well, there we go. We made a. It's not a room that we made. We made something. We made something that's not a room. This wall is really tired. This wall has had enough, and it's leaning over a giant gold nugget. All right, awesome. Let me cancel that. Get out of there. All right, so I think I'm gonna end it here today. I think we had a pretty good time today. I might cut this up into like half-hour pieces and then upload them. And when we come back, I do want to continue. I think we'll look at the lighting quick start guide. And oh wait, no, that comes afterwards. Hold on. You know what? We don't need that there. Basic level design BXP adding brush. I don't know if we need that. So we're gonna look at the artist quick start guide, and then we're gonna think about editing, geometry editing, edit, brush clip, pen, flip, edit. What can I edit? Edit, apply, triangulate, and then I can take this triangle, extrude, let me not do, let me just stop. All right. So I want to know if I need, because there's a, I just want to know if I can create content using only Unreal Engine editor, or if I need to like make static meshes in other programs and then edit it in here. I don't know. Anyway, we'll be back. Hey, this is cool. We're learning.